The Colorado Rockies stretched endlessly beneath a slate-gray sky, their jagged peaks disappearing into low-hanging clouds that promised nothing but misery. November wind cut through the pine forests like a blade, carrying with it the scent of coming snow and something else, something wild and untamed that belonged to this harsh land. The trees stood like dark sentinels, their branches heavy with frost, creaking and groaning in the bitter cold. Fresh tracks crossed the muddy trail, elk, certainly, but also the deeper impressions of mountain cats that prowled these heights. Ravens circled overhead, their harsh cries echoing off the canyon walls, as if they sensed death lurking somewhere in the shadows below. Clara Bennett pressed her face against the rough canvas of the covered wagon, trying to catch one last glimpse of the world outside before darkness fell completely. Just yesterday morning, she had been Clara Morrison, dressed in her mother's wedding gown, speaking vows in the tiny chapel at Silver Creek. Now, barely 24 hours into her new life, she found herself wondering if she would live to see another dawn. The attack had come swift and brutal. One moment, she and her new husband Samuel were making their way toward his ranch near Durango, accompanied by 2 hired men. The next, gunfire erupted from the rocks above. Horses screamed, and men shouted. Samuel had pushed her down into the wagon bed, yelling at her to stay hidden, before grabbing his rifle and jumping out to fight. She never saw him again. The bandits, 5 of them, maybe 6, had overwhelmed the small party within minutes. Clara had heard the terrible sounds of struggle, the final gunshots. Then rough hands dragged her from her hiding place. They bound her wrists with coarse rope that bit into her skin, stuffed a dirty rag in her mouth, and threw her across a saddle like a sack of grain. Now, hours later, deep in the mountain wilderness, they had made camp in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. The ramshackle tent where they'd thrown her reeked of wet leather, tobacco, and unwashed men. Water dripped steadily through holes in the canvas, each drop landing with maddening regularity on the packed earth floor. Clara's wedding dress, once pristine white silk, was now torn and mud-stained beyond recognition. Her carefully pinned hair had come loose during the ride, hanging in tangled strands around her face. The ropes around her wrists had been tied to a stake driven into the ground, giving her just enough slack to sit up but not enough to stand. Outside, she could hear the bandits arguing over a fire. Their leader, a man they called Hayes, spoke with a voice like grinding stone. "The Bennett family'll pay good money to get her back. That ranch of theirs sits on the best water rights in 3 counties. "What if they don't pay?" another voice asked, younger, nervous. "Then we sell her down to Mexico. Pretty young thing like that'll fetch a fine price." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. The Bennetts weren't her family. They were Samuel's. Would they even care what happened to their son's day-old bride? And Samuel... She forced herself not to think about what those final gunshots might have meant. The wind picked up, sending the tent walls billowing and snapping. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Long, mournful, and terrifyingly close. Another answered it, then another, until the night filled with their savage chorus. Clara had heard wolves before, safe behind the walls of her father's house in Denver, but out here in the wilderness, with only thin canvas between her and them. The sound turned her blood to ice. She tested the ropes again, pulling until her wrists burned. The stake held firm. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Crying wouldn't save her. Nothing would save her unless... "Please," she whispered into the darkness, though she knew no one could hear. "Please, someone, save me now." Miles away, higher up the mountain where the trees grew sparse and the wind howled without mercy, Jonah McCready crouched behind a fallen log, watching a small herd of mule deer pick their way across a moonlit meadow. He'd been tracking them for 2 days, needing the meat to last through the coming winter months. The big man moved with surprising quiet for his size, his buckskin clothes blending into the forest shadows. His dark hair, grown long and wild, hung past his shoulders, and a thick beard covered most of his face. To the folks down in Silver Creek, he looked like something out of their worst nightmares. A savage, a hermit, maybe worse. They called him the Ghost of Granite Peak when they thought he couldn't hear. Mothers used his name to frighten children into obedience. Better mind your chores, or the wild man McCready'll carry you off to his cave. If only they knew the truth, that their monster had once been one of them, a man with a home, a family, dreams of his own, before the lies, before the false witness that had cost him everything. Jonah notched an arrow, drew his bow, and waited for the perfect shot. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying with it an unexpected sound. He froze, every sense alert. There, carried on the gusting wind, a cry, human, female, desperate. "Save me now!" The words were faint, almost lost in the wind, but unmistakable. Someone was in trouble. Bad trouble from the sound of it. Jonah lowered his bow, the deer forgotten. He'd learned long ago to mind his own business, to stay far from the affairs of the valley people who'd branded him a killer. But something in that voice, the pure terror of it, stirred memories he'd tried hard to bury. He turned toward the sound, then hesitated. Getting involved meant risk. If whoever was in trouble saw him, word would spread. The law might come looking again. The fragile peace he'd built in these mountains would shatter. The cry came again, weaker this time, almost lost in the wolf song. A young woman, from the sound of it, scared, desperate, alone. Jonah cursed under his breath and began moving down the mountain. Silent as a shadow despite his size, he knew these woods like others knew their own homes, every game trail, every hidden canyon, every sheltered grove. Within minutes, he'd covered ground that would take most men an hour to traverse. The smell hit him first, smoke from a campfire, but also something else. Fear had a scent all its own, sharp and acrid. Voices carried on the wind. Rough male laughter mixed with crude jokes. Jonah's jaw tightened. He'd heard that kind of laughter before, in the mining camps and frontier saloons. It never meant anything good. He circled wide, using the thick pines for cover, until he could see the glow of firelight through the trees. 5 men sat around a blazing fire, passing a bottle between them. Their horses were picketed nearby. Good animals, too good for honest men who made camp like this. Weapons lay scattered about with the carelessness of men who thought themselves beyond danger. But it was the shabby tent that drew his attention, or rather, what he glimpsed through a tear in its side, a figure in white, bound and huddled on the ground. Even from this distance, he could see her shoulders shaking, the ghost of a wedding dress, torn and muddied, told its own grim story. "Bride's probably getting cold in there," one of the bandits said, standing and stretching. "Maybe I ought to go warm her up." "Hayes said hands off," another warned. "She's worth more untouched. Hayes ain't here. Rode down to scout the trail." Jonah had heard enough. These were the worst kind of men, those who preyed on the helpless and thought their guns made them kings of the wilderness. He'd known their type during the war, had seen what they did when they thought no one was watching. Moving silent as smoke, he began to plan. 5 men, all armed. The tent was 30 feet from the fire, half hidden in shadow. The girl was tied, probably gagged from her silence now. He'd need to be quick, silent, and utterly ruthless, as if in answer to his thoughts. The wolves howled again. Closer now. The bandits glanced nervously into the darkness, hands moving instinctively toward their guns. They knew, as all men who lived by violence knew, that the wilderness had its own justice. Jonah smiled grimly beneath his beard. Tonight, he would be that justice. The mountain man settled into wait, patient as the stones themselves, while the bound bride's whispered pleas echoed in his memory. "Save me now." The hunt was on. The moon hung like a silver dollar in the black sky, casting everything in sharp relief, snow-covered ground glowing white between the dark pillars of pine trees. Jonah moved through this landscape of light and shadow like a creature born to it, each footstep carefully placed to avoid the patches of frozen snow that would crunch beneath his weight. The temperature had dropped another 10 degrees since nightfall. Ice crystals formed in his beard with each breath, but the cold was an old friend, one that sharpened his senses rather than dulled them. He'd learned long ago that the mountain's bitter embrace could be either death or salvation. It all depended on whether you fought it or flowed with it. The bandits' fire had died down to glowing coals, casting dancing shadows across the camp. 3 of them slept, wrapped in blankets near the dying warmth. One sat on guard, rifle across his knees, but his head nodded forward every few moments as sleep tried to claim him. The 5th, the one who'd wanted to visit the tent, had stumbled off into the trees some time ago, probably to relieve himself. Perfect. Jonah circled to where the 5th man had disappeared. Sure enough, he found him leaning against a tree, fumbling with his belt. The mountain man moved swift and silent. One hand clamped over the bandit's mouth while the other brought the hunting knife across in a quick, merciful motion. The man dropped without a sound, his last breath misting in the cold air. 1 down, 4 to go. Jonah dragged the body deeper into the trees, covering it with snow and pine needles. Then he took the man's pistol, a Colt .45, well-maintained despite its owner's crude nature. He preferred his bow for hunting, but for work like this, he'd learned to appreciate Sam Colt's equalizer. Back at the camp, the guard had finally lost his battle with sleep, chin resting on his chest. Jonah approached from behind, quiet as falling snow. The knife did its work again, and he lowered the man gently to the ground, making no more noise than a sigh of wind. 2 down. The remaining 3 posed more of a challenge. They slept close together, and any disturbance might wake them all. Jonah considered his options, then noticed the horses. They stamped and snorted nervously, sensing the predator among them. If he could spook them. A wolf howl, perfectly mimicked, split the night air. The horses went wild, rearing and pulling at their picket line. One broke free, then another, their hooves thundering as they bolted into the darkness. What in the... One bandit jerked awake, reaching for his gun. The horses! Another shouted, throwing off his blanket. In the confusion, Jonah struck. His knife found the first man before he could fully stand. The Colt boomed in his other hand, dropping the second. The 3rd bandit, quicker than his companions, managed to get off a shot that whistled past Jonah's ear before the mountain man's return fire sent him sprawling. Then, silence. Only the wind and the distant sound of fleeing horses remained. Jonah stood still for a long moment, listening, watching. When he was certain no more threats remained, he turned toward the tent. Inside, he could hear rapid breathing, muffled sounds of fear. The girl had heard everything, the brief, violent struggle that had ended her captors' lives. He approached slowly, not wanting to frighten her more. Easy now, he called softly. I'm here to help. Pushing aside the tent flap, he saw her clearly for the first time. She was young, maybe 20, certainly no more. Her dark hair hung tangled around a face that would have been pretty if not for the dirt and terror marking it. The wedding dress told its own tragic story. But it was her eyes that caught him, deep brown, wide with fear, but holding a spark of something else. Defiance. Maybe, or hope. The gag in her mouth muffled her attempts to speak. Jonah knelt beside her, moving slow and careful like he would with a spooked animal. I'm going to take this off, he said, reaching for the gag. Please don't scream. There might be more of them about. She nodded, and he pulled the filthy cloth away. She gasped, drawing in deep breaths of cold air. But true to her word, she didn't scream. Thank you, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Thank God, thank you. Jonah pulled out his knife to cut her bonds, and she flinched. Just cutting the ropes, he assured her. The blade sliced through easily, and he heard her sharp intake of breath as blood flowed back into her hands. The mountain man cut the ropes and claimed her breath. The words seemed to echo in the small space as she gasped and sobbed, tears flowing freely now. Her wrists were raw and bleeding where she'd fought against the bindings. Can you stand? He asked. She tried, but her legs buckled. Hours of being tied in one position had left her muscles cramped and useless. Without thinking, Jonah scooped her up in his arms. She weighed next to nothing, bird bones and torn silk. "We need to move," he said. "Their leader's still out there somewhere, and this gunfire will bring him back," as if to emphasize his point. Clouds rolled across the moon, plunging the forest into deeper darkness. The temperature dropped another few degrees, and the wind picked up, carrying with it the smell of snow. "Storm coming," Jonah muttered. "Bad one, from the feel of it." He carried her to where he'd left his pack, setting her down gently while he gathered what supplies they'd need. The bandits' camp might have useful items, but there was no time. Already, the first fat snowflakes were beginning to fall. "My husband," Clara said suddenly. "Samuel, is he?" Jonah met her eyes, saw the desperate hope there. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I only saw you in the camp, but if we don't move now, we'll both be dead by morning." She nodded, understanding. Grief would have to wait. Survival came first in these mountains. Jonah fashioned a rough cloak from one of the bandits' blankets, wrapping it around her shoulders. Her wedding dress, what was left of it, offered no protection against the coming storm. He pulled off his own coat and handed it to her. "I can't take. You'll freeze without it," he said gruffly. "I'm used to the cold." She looked at him then, really looked at him. In the darkness, she could barely make out his features. Wild hair, thick beard, clothes that had seen better days. But his eyes were kind, and his hands had been gentle when he cut her free. "What's your name?" she asked. He hesitated. Giving his name meant trusting her, and trust was something he'd learned to avoid. But something about this girl, half frozen and traumatized but still maintaining her composure, made him answer, "Jonah. Jonah McCready." If she recognized the name, the killer of Granite Peak, the wild man mothers used to frighten children, she gave no sign. "I'm Clara Bennett, was Morrison, until yesterday." Yesterday. Had it really only been a day since she'd stood in that chapel, full of hope for her new life? It seemed like a lifetime ago. The snow was falling harder now, big flakes that stuck to everything they touched. In minutes, the ground was covered in a thin white layer that would only grow deeper as the night went on. "We need shelter," Jonah said, scanning the darkness. "My cabin's 8 miles up the mountain. In good weather, it's a hard climb. In this storm..." He didn't need to finish. They both understood the danger, but staying here meant certain death when Hayes returned. "I can walk," Clara said, struggling to her feet. It was a lie, and they both knew it, but Jonah respected her for trying. "Save your strength," he said, lifting her again. "We've got a long way to go," and so they plunged into the storm. The mountain man carrying his unexpected burden through a world gone white and wild. Behind them, the bandits' camp disappeared beneath the falling snow, erasing all trace of the violence that had occurred there. Clara buried her face against Jonah's shoulder, breathing in the scent of leather and pine smoke. He smelled like the wilderness itself, raw and honest and strangely comforting after the stink of her captors. She should have been terrified, alone with a strange man in a blizzard. But somehow, impossibly, she felt safer in his arms than she had since leaving Denver. The wind howled around them, driving snow into their faces. Jonah bent his head against it, pushing forward with determined steps. Each breath came out in white puffs that were immediately torn away by the gale. "Thank you," Clara whispered against his chest. "Save your breath," he replied, but not unkindly. "We're not safe yet." As if to prove his point, a gunshot cracked through the storm, followed by a voice roaring with rage. Hayes had returned to find his men dead and his prize gone. Jonah quickened his pace, disappearing into the white wall of the blizzard. Behind them, Hayes's curses were swallowed by the wind. The storm that threatened their lives had also become their salvation, hiding their tracks as fast as they made them, but 8 miles in a blizzard, carrying another person, with an armed man hunting them. Even Jonah wondered if they'd make it. Still, he pushed on, because stopping meant death. And this girl, this brave, broken girl in her ruined wedding dress, deserved better than to die in the snow. The mountain had taken much from him over the years. Tonight, perhaps, it would give something back. The cabin materialized out of the blizzard like something from a fever dream. Low, solid, built of logs chinked with mud and moss. Snow had already piled against one wall, and icicles hung from the eaves like crystal teeth. Jonah shouldered open the heavy door, carrying Clara into the blessed shelter of his home. Home was perhaps too generous a word. The single room contained only the essentials for survival: a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, a bed of pine boughs covered with furs, shelves lined with preserved food and supplies. No decorations, no comforts beyond the purely practical. It was the dwelling of a man who had stripped life down to its barest necessities. Jonah set Clara gently on a three-legged stool near the cold fireplace, then immediately set about building a fire. His hands, despite their size, moved with practiced efficiency, shaving kindling, arranging logs, striking flint to steel. Within minutes, orange flames began to lick at the dry wood, sending shadows dancing across the log walls. Clara huddled in his coat and the makeshift blanket cloak, shivering so hard her teeth chattered. The warmth from the growing fire seemed to barely touch her. Now that they were safe, or at least safer, the shock of everything that had happened began to set in. "Need to get you warm," Jonah muttered, more to himself than to her. He pulled a kettle from a shelf, filled it with water from a covered barrel, and set it on a hook over the fire. Then he retrieved a bundle of clothes from a wooden chest in the corner. These were... He stopped, cleared his throat. "They're clean, dry, too big, but better than what you're wearing." Clara looked down at her ruined wedding dress, now soaked through with melted snow. Yesterday morning, her mother had helped her into it, tears of joy streaming down her face. Now it was nothing but torn silk and painful memories. "Thank you," she managed through chattering teeth. Jonah turned his back while she changed, busying himself with preparing pine needle tea. The wind screamed around the cabin, finding every tiny gap in the walls, but the fire was beginning to win its battle against the cold. The smell of burning pine resin mixed with something else, herbs hanging from the rafters, leather, the lingering scent of smoked meat. When Clara spoke again, her voice was steadier. "You can turn around." She looked almost comical in the oversized wool shirt and canvas pants. The legs rolled up several times and a rope serving as a belt, but color was returning to her cheeks, and she'd stopped shivering quite so violently. Jonah handed her a cup of the pine needle tea. "Drink, it'll warm you from the inside." She took a sip, made a face at the bitter taste, but continued drinking. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sounds the crackling fire and the storm's fury outside. "Those men," Clara finally said, staring into her cup. Are they all?" "Dead," Jonah confirmed simply. "Except their leader, Hayes. He wasn't in camp." Clara nodded slowly, processing this. "They killed Samuel, my husband, shot him down like a dog when he tried to protect me." Her voice was flat, emotionless, as if she were talking about strangers. "I'm sorry," Jonah said, and meant it. He knew what it was like to lose everything in a moment of violence. "I barely knew him," Clara continued, still in that strange, detached voice. "Our fathers arranged the marriage. Good match. They said, his family's ranch, my father's shipping business. I met him 3 times before our wedding day." She laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it. "Mother said I'd learn to love him in time. That's how it was for her and father. But now..." She trailed off, shaking her head. "Now you're alive," Jonah said quietly. "That's what matters." Clara looked at him then, really studied him in the firelight. The wild hair and beard made him look like something out of a frontier legend, but his eyes, gray like winter sky, held a sadness that spoke of deep wounds. "Why do you live up here alone?" she asked. "You're not like those bandits. You know how to speak properly, how to..." She gestured vaguely at the cabin, which, while sparse, was clean and well organized. Jonah was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. Careful. 5 years ago, I had a different life. Down in Silver Creek, I was a blacksmith, had a shop, friends. There was even a woman who— He stopped, jaw tightening. What happened? A man named Garrett Marsh wanted my land. It had good water access, perfect for the mill he planned to build. I wouldn't sell. Jonah stared into the fire, lost in memory. Next thing I knew, I was being arrested for killing Tom Brennan, a drifter who'd been found dead near my property. Marsh had witnesses, 3 men who swore they saw me do it. Clara's hands tightened on her cup. She knew how justice worked in frontier towns, how easily truth could be buried beneath lies and money. I'd never seen Brennan before they showed me his body. Jonah continued. But Marsh had paid those witnesses well. The trial was a joke. Only reason I'm not hanging from a rope is I escaped the night before they planned to do it. And you've been up here ever since. He nodded. Town still thinks I'm a killer. They put out bounty notices first couple years, but eventually figured I'd died in the mountains. Now I'm just a story they tell. The murderer of Granite Peak. The wild man who'll steal children who don't mind their parents. But you're innocent, Clara said. Jonah's smile was grim. Doesn't matter what's true, only matters what people believe. Clara set down her cup and stood, pacing the small space. The oversized clothes made her look younger, more vulnerable, but there was steel in her spine. My marriage was supposed to save my family. Father made some bad investments, lost almost everything. The Bennetts offered to help, but only if I married Samuel. She laughed again, that same bitter sound. Mother called it duty, said women like us don't get to choose love. We choose survival. And now Samuel's dead. The money's gone, and I'm— She stopped pacing, shoulders slumping. I'm ruined, a widow before I was truly a wife. No respectable man will want me now, not after being held captive by those men. People will talk, say things. People always talk, Jonah said quietly. Let them. Easy for you to say. You've already lost your reputation. Mine was all I had left, and now— Tears finally came, rolling silently down her cheeks. Jonah stood awkwardly, unsure how to comfort her. He'd been alone so long he'd almost forgotten how to be around other people, especially a crying woman. Finally, he settled for practical action, refilling her cup and adding a dollop of honey from his stores. Drink, he said gently. Rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do. Clara wiped her eyes, accepting the cup. Hayes will come looking. Let him look. He won't find this place in the storm, and by morning the snow will have covered our tracks. And after that, I can't stay here forever. But I can't go back either, even if my family would take me back. I'd be the woman who spent a night in the wilderness with a strange man. They'd say I'm— She couldn't finish the sentence. You're a survivor, Jonah said firmly. That's all that matters. Clara looked around the simple cabin, the herbs hanging from the rafters, the neat rows of preserved foods, the bearskin rug before the fire. You've made a life here, away from all their judgments and lies. It's not much of a life, Jonah admitted. Gets lonely, quiet. Sometimes I go weeks without hearing another human voice. But you're free, Clara said softly. No one telling you who to be, what to do, who to marry. Their eyes met across the small space, and something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps. 2 souls marked by society's judgments, finding unexpected kinship in a cabin surrounded by storm. The wind chose that moment to slam against the walls with renewed fury, making them both jump. The fire flickered, and Jonah moved to add more wood. You should sleep, he said. Take the bed. I'll keep watch. I couldn't. You've been through enough. Rest. I've slept in worse places than a chair by the fire. Clara wanted to protest, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a physical weight. The warmth, the safety, the simple kindness of this strange man. It all combined to drain the last of her strength. She made her way to the bed of pine boughs, sinking into the soft furs. They smelled of wood smoke and cedar, oddly comforting. "Jonah," he looked over from where he was banking the fire for the night. "Thank you for saving me, for—" She gestured weakly at the cabin. "The clothes. Everything. Just thank you." He nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Sleep now. We'll deal with tomorrow when it comes." Clara closed her eyes, and despite everything, the terror, the loss, the uncertain future, she felt safer than she had in months. Outside, the blizzard raged on, but inside the cabin was warm and quiet, protected by a man who understood what it meant to be cast out, to be judged unfairly by those who should have protected you. As sleep took her, her last thought was a strange one. Perhaps being ruined wasn't the end of the world. Perhaps, in these wild mountains with this wild man, she might find something she'd never had in her respectable life down below, the freedom to choose her own path. Jonah sat by the fire, rifle across his knees, watching the flames and listening to the storm. Occasionally, he glanced at the sleeping woman in his bed, still hardly believing the turn his solitary life had taken. He'd saved her from the bandits. Yes, but what came next? Come morning, they'd have to make decisions that would affect both their futures. For now, though, he kept watch, guardian against the storm and whatever dangers it might hide. It had been years since he'd had someone to protect, someone who needed him. It felt strange. It felt right. It felt like the beginning of something he couldn't yet name. Dawn broke clear and crystalline over the mountains, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Fresh snow lay 3 feet deep in the meadows, turning the harsh landscape into something almost magical. Ice crystals sparkled like diamonds on every surface, and the air was so cold and pure it hurt to breathe. Clara woke to find Jonah already up, stirring something in a pot over the fire. The smell of cooking meat and wild onions filled the cabin, making her stomach growl. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten. "Morning," Jonah said without turning around. "Coffee's hot if you want some." She sat up, still wrapped in furs, and accepted the tin cup he offered. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but it was hot and helped clear the fog from her mind. "The storm's passed," she observed, looking toward the single window where sunlight streamed in. "For now. But Hayes is still out there. Found his tracks this morning, about a mile down. He's holed up in an old trapper's shack, waiting." Clara's hand tightened on the cup. "He won't give up. Men like him never do." Jonah ladled stew into 2 bowls. "Eat. You'll need strength for what's coming." They ate in companionable silence, and Clara found herself oddly comforted by the simple domesticity of it. When they finished, Jonah stood and began gathering supplies. "I need to teach you some things," he said. "How to build a fire that won't smoke and give away your position. How to find water when the streams are frozen. How to read the weather signs. You think we'll be here that long? I think you need to be prepared for anything." He handed her a pair of snowshoes. "First lesson, walking in deep snow without exhausting yourself." They spent the morning outside, Jonah patiently teaching her the basics of mountain survival. Clara proved a quick student, her natural intelligence overcoming her city upbringing. She learned to strap on the snowshoes, to walk with the rolling gait that kept her from sinking into the drifts. "Like this?" she asked, moving across the snow with growing confidence. "Better. Now watch." Jonah knelt by a pine tree, showing her how to identify the inner bark that could be eaten in desperate times, how to spot the tracks of different animals, which plants remained edible even in winter. As the sun climbed higher, they heard it, the distant crack of a rifle, echoing across the valleys. Hayes, shooting at shadows or trying to signal any remaining allies. "He's getting frustrated," Jonah observed. "That's good. Frustrated men make mistakes." They were heading back to the cabin when Clara stopped suddenly, her face lighting up. "Oh, look!" A young mule deer stood at the edge of the clearing, not 20 feet away. It was a doe, her winter coat thick and gray, ears swiveling as she assessed these strange creatures. For a long moment, woman and deer regarded each other with mutual curiosity. Then Clara laughed. A real laugh, not the bitter sound from the night before. The deer bounded away in 3 graceful leaps, white tail flashing, and Clara's laughter followed it into the trees. "Beautiful," she breathed, eyes shining. "I've seen deer before, of course, but never so close, never so free." Jonah finished quietly. She turned to him, and he was struck again by how young she looked in the borrowed clothes, with snow dusting her dark hair. But her eyes held new depth, new understanding. "Yes, free." She looked back where the deer had vanished. "Is that what you felt when you first came up here? Like you could finally breathe?" Jonah considered the question. "At first, I just felt angry, betrayed. I came up here to hide, to lick my wounds like an injured bear. But then—" He gestured at the mountains surrounding them. "The mountains don't care about your past. They don't judge. They just are. You either learn to live with them, or you die. And you learned, had to. And somewhere along the way, I stopped being angry and started being—" He searched for the word. "Grateful, I suppose, for the solitude, the simplicity." They continued back to the cabin, unaware that they were walking in synchronized steps, their snowshoes leaving parallel tracks in the snow. Inside. As Clara helped prepare the midday meal, she found herself humming, something she hadn't done since her father's financial troubles began. "My grandmother taught me that song," she said, catching herself. "She came west in '49 during the gold rush. Tough as leather. That woman, she used to say the frontier stripped away everything false, left only what was real. Smart woman," Jonah said, adding wood to the fire. "She would have liked you, I think. She had no patience for what she called civilized foolishness. Town gossip, social pretenses, arranged marriages." Clara's voice trailed off on the last words. "Do you miss it? Town life?" Clara considered while chopping wild carrots Jonah had preserved from autumn. "I thought I would. The parties, the shops, the safety, I suppose. But sitting in that tent, waiting to be ransomed or worse, I realized something. That safety was an illusion. We follow all their rules, do what's expected. And where does it lead? My father lost everything trying to appear prosperous. I married a stranger to save face. And for what? Freedom's got its own price," Jonah warned. "Cold nights, empty bellies sometimes, no one to help when trouble comes." "But it's honest," Clara said firmly. "That's what I keep thinking. Everything up here, the cold, the danger, the beauty, it's all honest. No pretense, no lies." A comfortable quiet settled between them as they worked side by side, outside. The sun had reached its zenith, making the snow-covered world blindingly bright. Jonah found himself stealing glances at Clara, amazed at how naturally she'd adapted to the cabin's rhythms. Most town folk would have been complaining by now, demanding to be taken back to civilization. But she seemed to bloom in the mountain air, color high in her cheeks, movements growing more confident with each passing hour. "Tell me about her," Clara said suddenly. "The woman you mentioned last night." Jonah's hands stilled on the venison he was cutting. "Nothing to tell. Please, I'd like to know." He sighed, resuming his work. "Mary Sullivan, school teacher. Had red hair that caught fire in the sunlight, and a temper to match. She believed me when the accusations came, stood up in court, called Marsh a liar to his face. Brave woman. Too brave. Her school burned down a week after I escaped. Accident, they said. She left town the next day, went back east. Can't say I blame her." Clara reached out impulsively, touching his arm. "I'm sorry." He looked at her hand on his sleeve. Such a small gesture, but the first human touch he'd felt in years that wasn't violence. Long time ago now. Doesn't make it hurt less. Their eyes met, and something shifted in the air between them. Jonah pulled away first, busying himself with unnecessary tasks. Clara let him go, understanding the need for walls when wounds ran deep. As afternoon shadows grew long, they made another disturbing discovery. Smoke rising from the valley below. Not just one fire, but 3. Hayes found help, Jonah said grimly, studying the smoke through his field glasses. Probably promised them a share of the ransom money. How many? Can't tell from here, but more than we can fight directly. He lowered the glasses, thinking, we need to be smart about this. What do you mean? These mountains are my territory. I know every cave, every game trail, every place where snow builds up unstable. If they want to come up here. A cold smile crossed his face. Let them try. That evening, as they prepared for what might come, Clara surprised him again. Teach me to shoot. What? You heard me. I won't be helpless again. Never again. Jonah studied her determined face, then nodded. He handed her an old Springfield rifle, showing her how to hold it, how to sight, how to squeeze rather than pull the trigger. Her first shots went wild, but she kept trying, jaws set with determination. By the dozenth shot, she was hitting the target, a piece of bark nailed to a tree, more often than not. You're a natural, Jonah said, impressed despite himself. I had a good teacher. She smiled at him, and he felt something in his chest loosen, some frozen thing beginning to thaw. As darkness fell, they prepared for siege. Jonah showed Clara where extra ammunition was stored, the hidden exit he'd built into the cabin's floor, the cache of supplies in a nearby cave. She absorbed it all with quiet intensity. You don't have to stay, she said suddenly as they finished preparations. This is my trouble, not yours. You could go deeper into the mountains. Wait until... No. The word came out harsher than he intended. I'm not leaving you to face them alone. Why? She searched his face in the firelight. You don't owe me anything. You already saved my life once. Jonah was quiet for a long moment. Maybe I'm tired of being alone, he finally admitted. Maybe I'm tired of running. Or maybe... He met her eyes. Maybe I see something in you worth fighting for. Clara's breath caught, in the warmth of the cabin, with danger prowling somewhere in the darkness outside. She felt more alive than she ever had in her safe, respectable life. This man, this rough, gentle, complicated man, had shown her more honesty in 2 days than she'd known in 20 years. Jonah, she began, but he held up a hand. Listen. In the distance, carried on the night wind, came the sound of horses and harsh voices. Hayes had found his reinforcements, and they were coming. Get some rest, Jonah said, checking his rifle one more time. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. But Clara didn't move. Instead, she stood beside him at the window, looking out at the star-filled sky above the peaks. Whatever happens, she said quietly, I want you to know, these have been the best 2 days of my life. Is that strange? In the middle of all this fear and danger, I've never felt more myself. Jonah looked down at her, this unlikely woman who'd crashed into his solitary existence and somehow made it better. Not strange at all, he said softly. Not strange at all. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars and waiting for dawn, while somewhere in the darkness below, their enemies made camp and plotted violence. But inside the cabin was warmth and companionship, and something that might, given time and courage, grow into more. The mountains had brought them together. Now they would see if those same mountains would let them stay that way. The descent from Jonah's cabin began before dawn, the eastern sky just starting to pale above the peaks. They'd made the hard decision during the night. Staying meant being trapped, outnumbered and outgunned. Their only chance was to reach the abandoned ranger station at Copper Creek, where they might find shelter and supplies for the journey to town. Watch that ledge, Jonah warned, guiding Clara around a section where ice had formed over the narrow trail. One wrong step and you'll slide 200 feet before anything stops you. Clara nodded, concentrating on placing her boots exactly where he showed her. The path, if it could be called that, was treacherous in daylight, in the gray pre-dawn, with ice making every surface slick as glass. It was nearly suicidal. Behind them, smoke still rose from Hayes's camp. They'd bought themselves time by leaving false tracks leading higher into the mountains. But it wouldn't fool experienced trackers for long. The trail switched back down through stands of aspen and pine, occasionally opening onto vistas that would have been breathtaking if they'd had time to appreciate them. Instead, every exposed section made Clara's heart race. Out here, they were visible to anyone with field glasses. "How you holding up?" Jonah asked when they paused in a grove of blue spruce. "I'm fine," Clara said, though her legs trembled from the strain. Town life hadn't prepared her for this kind of exertion. "Here," he handed her a piece of jerky and his water flask. "Need to keep your strength up." As she drank, they heard it, the distant baying of dogs. "They brought hounds," Jonah said grimly. "Smart, makes our false trail worthless." "How far to the station?" 6 miles, maybe 7. He studied the lightening sky. "We need to move faster." The next 2 hours were a blur of controlled falling more than walking. The trail deteriorated as they descended, washed out in places by spring floods, blocked in others by deadfall. Jonah led them off trail several times, following game paths only he could see. It was during one of these detours that Clara saved his life. They were traversing a steep slope covered in loose shale when Jonah's foot found a patch of ice hidden beneath the stones. He slipped, sliding toward a drop-off that fell away into morning mist. Clara didn't think. She lunged forward, grabbing his pack with both hands, throwing her whole weight backward. For a moment they teetered on the edge of disaster. Then Clara found her footing, hauling him back from the brink with strength born of desperation. They collapsed together on solid ground, breathing hard. Jonah stared at her with something like wonder. That was, "Thank you. We're even now." Clara gasped, managing a shaky smile. The dogs sounded closer. They could hear men's voices too, carried on the still morning air. Jonah pulled Clara to her feet. "Come on, I know a shortcut." The shortcut involved chimneying down a near-vertical ravine, using opposing walls for support. Clara's dress. She'd changed back into it for warmth. Layering Jonah's spare clothes underneath, caught and tore on the rocks. By the time they reached the bottom, her hands were scraped raw and bleeding. "Let me see," Jonah said, taking her hands gently in his. He wrapped them with strips torn from his shirt, his touch careful despite the urgency of their situation. "We're not going to make it, are we?" Clara asked quietly. "Don't talk like that." But his eyes betrayed his own doubts. They pushed on as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows through the pines. The terrain gradually leveled out, which should have been a relief but only meant their pursuers could move faster too. Then, a miracle, or perhaps a curse. They stumbled onto an old mining road, partially overgrown but still passable. It would lead them directly to the ranger station, but it would also make them easy to track. "No choice," Jonah decided. "We run." They ran, or rather, they attempted something between a jog and a stumble, exhaustion making their movements clumsy. Clara's breath came in ragged gasps, her side cramping fiercely, but she kept moving. The ranger station appeared around a bend like a promise of salvation. It was a small log structure, built to last, with thick walls and narrow windows that could serve as gun ports. More importantly, smoke rose from its chimney. "Someone's there," Clara breathed. Jonah pulled her behind a boulder. Could be anyone. Trappers, miners, more of Hayes's men. The dogs were getting louder, much louder. "We have to chance it," Clara said. Jonah nodded. They approached cautiously, Jonah calling out when they were still 50 yards away. "Hello, the station. We're travelers seeking shelter." The door opened, and an old man emerged, rifle in hand but not pointed at them. He was grizzled and bent, with a face like worn leather and keen eyes that missed nothing. Well, he said. "Jonah McCready. Been a while." "Ezra." Jonah relaxed fractionally. "Didn't know you were still working the station. Retired 2 years back, but I winter here sometimes. Quieter than town." Ezra's gaze shifted to Clara, taking in her torn dress, bandaged hands, and exhausted face. "Trouble following you? Hayes and his gang, maybe 6 men, with dogs." Ezra spat tobacco juice into the snow. Hayes, should have known that snake would turn up. Get inside, both of you. The station's interior was sparse, but well supplied. Ezra had made it comfortable in his way. A pot-bellied stove radiating warmth. Shelves stocked with provisions. Rifles racked on the walls. Sit, he ordered Clara, who nearly collapsed onto a rough bench. You look about done in, girl. We can't stay, Jonah said. Don't want to bring trouble to your door. Son, I've been dealing with trouble since before you were born. Hayes wants a fight. He'll get one. Ezra moved to the window, peering out. How long before they get here? An hour, maybe less. Time enough. The old man began pulling rifles from the rack, checking their loads. You still shoot as good as you used to. Better, Jonah said. Good. Girl, you know how to handle a gun? I'm learning, Clara said. Ezra studied her with those sharp eyes. You're that bride went missing from the Bennett party. Heard about it from a supply rider yesterday. Clara stiffened. What else did you hear? That your husband was dead? That bandits took you for ransom? He paused. That folks are saying all kinds of things about what might have happened to you out there. I suppose they are, Clara said quietly. Folks say a lot of things, Ezra continued, loading a Winchester, most of it horse droppings. I judge people by what I see, not what I hear, and what I see is a young woman who survived something terrible and come out fighting. Clara blinked back sudden tears. This gruff old stranger had shown her more kindness than she expected to find in the world now. They're coming, Jonah said from the window. Hayes rode at the front of 7 men, his face dark with rage even at a distance. The dogs ran ahead, baying their triumph at cornering their quarry. 8 against 3, Ezra mused. Had worse odds at Chancellorsville. You were at Chancellorsville, Clara asked. Burnside's corps, learned a lot about defensive positions. He handed her a rifle. You'll be at that window. Jonah, take the north side. I'll handle the door. Ezra, Jonah started. This isn't your fight. The hell it isn't. I've been waiting for an excuse to put Hayes in the ground for years. He killed my nephew over a card game in '72. Boy was only 19. The riders had stopped just out of rifle range. Hayes rode forward alone, stopping about 50 yards from the station. McCready, he shouted. Send out the girl and we'll let you walk away. Counteroffer. Jonah called back. You turn around now, and I won't kill you like I did your men. Hayes's face darkened further. You murdered 6 good men. 6 murderers and thieves. Jonah corrected. The world's better without them. Last chance. McCready, the girl for your life. Clara moved to the window, making herself visible. I'd rather die than go with you, she called out, her voice carrying clear and strong across the snow. Hayes laughed. An ugly sound. That can be arranged. Missy, boys, burn them out. I don't think so, Ezra muttered, sighting down his rifle barrel. The first shot came from Hayes's men, shattering a window. Then the battle erupted in earnest. Gunfire echoed off the mountains like thunder, powder smoke filling the air. Clara forced herself to aim, to squeeze the trigger like Jonah had taught her. Her first shot went wide, but her second found its mark, sending one rider tumbling from his saddle. Good shot, Ezra yelled, firing steadily. Keep it up! The attackers scattered, seeking cover behind rocks and trees. What followed was a deadly game of patience, each side waiting for the other to make a mistake. They're trying to flank us, Jonah warned, spotting movement to the left. Let them try, Ezra growled. He'd fought in too many battles to be rattled by common bandits. Minutes stretched like hours. Clara's arms ached from holding the heavy rifle. Her eyes burned from the smoke, but she kept watching, kept ready. This was what survival meant in the mountains, not just enduring the cold and finding food, but being willing to fight for your life when cornered. A man broke from cover, running for the station's blind spot. 3 rifles spoke as one, and he pitched forward into the snow, not moving again. That's 3 down, Ezra counted. 5 to go, but Hayes was cunning, under covering fire. 2 of his men reached the woodshed attached to the station. Smoke began to rise. They were trying to burn them out after all. The roof! Clara shouted. Flames were licking at the wooden shingles, spreading fast in the dry wood. In minutes, the whole station would be ablaze. We need water, Jonah said. No time, Ezra decided. We make a break for it. My horses are in the lean-to out back. Girl, can you ride? Yes. Then we go on 3. 1. Clara gripped her rifle tighter, heart pounding. 2. She caught Jonah's eye. He nodded, tried to smile reassuringly. 3. They burst from the station like a flood breaking a dam. Ezra laid down covering fire while Jonah and Clara ran for the horses. Bullets whined past, kicking up spurts of snow. Then Clara stumbled, crying out. Blood spread across her sleeve. A bullet had grazed her arm. Jonah swept her up without breaking stride, carrying her the last yards to the horses. Go! Go! Ezra shouted, backing toward them, still firing. They mounted, Jonah lifting Clara onto a sturdy mare before vaulting onto his own horse. Ezra was right behind them, surprisingly agile for his age. They spurred the horses hard, racing down the valley as the ranger station became a pillar of flame and smoke behind them. Hayes and his remaining men gave chase, but their horses were tired from the long climb. For 5 miles they ran, the horses' hooves thundering on the frozen ground. Finally, as they crested a rise, Jonah called a halt, far behind. Hayes had given up the chase, his tiny figure shaking a fist at the sky. Let me see that arm, Ezra demanded, examining Clara's wound. Just a graze. You'll live. Thank you, Clara said, including both men in her gaze. Both of you. What now? Jonah asked. Ezra considered. There's a marshal in Bridgewater, about 20 miles north. Honest man, he'll listen to your story. Maybe send a posse after Hayes. And then, the old man looked between them, a knowing glint in his eye. Then you two decide what comes next. World's full of possibilities for folks brave enough to seize them. As they rode on through the afternoon sun, Clara found herself thinking about those possibilities. She'd lost her old life, her reputation, her carefully planned future. But she'd gained something else, strength she never knew she had, and companions who judged her by her actions, not society's rules. The mountains had tested her and found her worthy. Now she had to decide what to do with that hard-won knowledge. The ambush came at Devil's Canyon, where the trail narrowed between towering walls of red rock. They'd been riding hard for 3 hours, putting distance between themselves and the burning ranger station. When the first shot rang out, Ezra's horse screamed and went down. The old man rolling clear with practiced ease. More gunfire erupted from the rocks above. Hayes had split his forces, sent men ahead to cut them off. The caves! Jonah shouted, pointing to a series of openings in the canyon wall. Move! They abandoned the horses, running for cover as bullets sparked off the stones around them. Clara stumbled, her wounded arm throwing off her balance, but Jonah steadied her, half dragging her toward safety. They made it to the largest cave mouth just as Hayes and his remaining men appeared at the canyon's entrance. Now they were trapped, rock walls behind them, enemies in front. Well, this is a fine mess, Ezra muttered, checking his ammunition. Though I've seen worse. The cave was deeper than it appeared, winding back into the mountain. Jonah had explored it years ago, remembered it connected to other chambers, maybe even another exit, but that was a desperate hope. How many rounds you got? He asked. Maybe 20, Ezra replied. 15, Clara added, surprising them with her calm inventory. Not enough for a prolonged siege. Jonah peered out at their attackers, counting 5 men including Hayes. The odds were getting better, but their position was worse. McCready! Hayes called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. You're trapped like rats. Give up the girl and maybe I'll make your death quick. He's certainly persistent, Clara observed dryly, despite their situation. Jonah almost smiled. The pampered city girl he'd rescued 3 days ago had transformed into someone harder, stronger. Mountain life did that, burned away the unnecessary, left only what mattered. There might be another way out. Jonah said quietly, These caves run deep, but it's been years since I explored them. And without torches, Better than sitting here waiting to die, Ezra said. They began retreating deeper into the cave, feeling their way along the rough walls. The light from the entrance faded quickly, leaving them in darkness so complete it felt solid. "Wait," Clara said. "I hear water." She was right. Somewhere ahead came the sound of running water, an underground stream. Maybe, which might lead to another opening. They pressed on, hands linked to keep from losing each other in the blackness. The sound of water grew louder, and the air became damp and cold. Then Jonah's reaching hand found nothing, a drop-off. "Careful," he warned. "There's a—" Gunfire erupted behind them. Hayes's men had entered the cave, bringing torches that threw dancing shadows on the walls. There was no time for caution. "Jump," Jonah decided. "It's water below. I can hear it." "You're mad," Ezra said. "Jump or die." Jonah countered. Clara squeezed his hand. "Together?" "Together." They jumped. The fall seemed endless, darkness rushing past, then shocking cold as they plunged into an underground pool. Clara came up gasping, disoriented in the absolute blackness. Strong hands found her, pulled her to what felt like a rocky shore. "Clara, Ezra," Jonah's voice worried. "Here," she coughed. "I'm here." Present and accounted for, Ezra added from somewhere nearby. "Though I'm too old for this nonsense." Above them, they could see torchlight at the edge they jumped from. Hayes was shouting orders, but his men seemed reluctant to follow their quarry into the unknown depths. "Can't stay here," Jonah said. "We'll freeze." They felt their way along the underground stream, hoping it led somewhere, anywhere but dead rock. Clara's teeth chattered uncontrollably, her wet clothes already stiffening in the cold air. But she kept moving, kept fighting. Then, blessed relief, a glimmer of light ahead. Not torchlight, but the gray gleam of daylight filtering through rock. They stumbled toward it, finding a narrow crack in the cave wall that opened onto a snow-covered ledge. They squeezed through one at a time, emerging into afternoon sunlight on the far side of the canyon. Below them, Hayes and his men were still searching the upper caves, unaware their prey had escaped. "We need fire," Jonah said, looking at Clara with concern. Her lips were blue, her whole body shaking. They found shelter in a grove of pines, and Jonah quickly built a fire using the dry inner bark and his flint. They huddled close to the flames, steam rising from their soaked clothes. "That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever done," Ezra said, wringing out his coat. "Both," Clara said through chattering teeth. "Definitely both." As warmth returned to their bodies, they took stock. They'd lost the horses, most of their supplies, and Hayes was still out there. But they were alive, and closer to Bridgewater than before. "We can make it by nightfall if we push hard." Jonah said, "The girl needs rest." Ezra protested. "Look at her." Clara stood, swaying slightly but determined. "The girl is right here and can speak for herself. I say we keep moving. Every minute we delay gives Hayes time to find us again." Jonah felt a surge of admiration. She'd been captured, shot at, nearly drowned, and half frozen. Yet she kept going. He'd known hardened mountain men with less grit. They set off through the forest, moving as quickly as exhaustion allowed. The sun was setting when they finally saw Bridgewater's lights twinkling in the valley below. It was a proper town, with a main street, several saloons, and most importantly, law and order. "I know the marshal," Ezra said. "Tom Morrison. Fought with him in the war. He'll listen." They entered town as darkness fell, drawing stares from the respectable folk out for evening strolls. They made quite a sight, clothes torn and muddy. Clara's dress ruined beyond recognition, all of them bearing the marks of their ordeal. The marshal's office was a solid brick building with barred windows. Tom Morrison proved to be a thin, sharp-eyed man with prematurely gray hair. He listened to their story without interrupting, occasionally making notes. "Hayes," he said when they finished. "Been wanting to get my hands on him for a while, but I'll need more than your word about what happened." "What more do you need?" Clara demanded. "Look at us. You think we did this to ourselves for amusement? Easy. Miss, I believe you, but the law needs evidence. Witnesses. I'm a witness, Ezra said firmly. Saw the whole thing. Hayes and his men attacked the ranger station, tried to burn us out. That's federal property, makes it a federal crime. Morrison's eyes sharpened. That changes things. I can deputize a posse, go after them at first light. And the lady? Jonah asked. She's been through enough. She needs protection, not more questions. I'll need a statement, but that can wait until tomorrow. There's a boarding house on 2nd Street. Mrs. Winters runs it. She'll take care of you. Miss. Clara looked between Jonah and Ezra. What about you? We'll find somewhere. Jonah said, No. Her voice was firm. We stay together, all of us, until this is finished. Morrison raised an eyebrow, but nodded. Mrs. Winters has rooms enough. Tell her I sent you. Outside the marshal's office, they paused in the lamplight. The normal sounds of town life, piano music from the saloons, horses clip-clopping past, people laughing, seemed strange after their days in the wilderness. Thank you, Clara said to Ezra. You risked your life for strangers. The old man shrugged. Wasn't much of a life anyway, sitting alone in that station. Besides, been a long time since I had a good fight. Reminded me I'm not dead yet. They found Miss Winters' boarding house, a neat 2-story building with lace curtains and a painted sign, Mrs. Winters herself was a formidable woman who took one look at them and started issuing orders. Hot baths, all of you. Then food, then bed. No arguments. Clara was given a room on the 2nd floor, along with a borrowed dress that approximately fit. When she came down to dinner, clean and in fresh clothes, Jonah barely recognized her. She looked like a proper town lady again, except for her eyes. They held depths they hadn't before. Over a meal of beef stew and fresh bread, they planned their next moves. Morrison will catch Hayes, Ezra said confidently. Man's a bloodhound when he gets the scent. And then, Clara asked, what happens to Hayes? Trial, most likely. Hanging, if there's justice. Clara nodded slowly. And Samuel's family, the Bennetts, they'll need to know. Morrison will handle that too. Jonah said gently, You don't have to face them. But I should, shouldn't I? Tell them what happened to their son? That's your choice, Ezra said. No one would blame you for wanting to put it all behind you. They ate in companionable silence for a while, despite everything, or perhaps because of it. The simple act of sharing a meal felt profound. They'd faced death together, saved each other's lives. It created bonds that polite society could never understand. I've been thinking, Clara said eventually, about what comes next. I can't go back to Denver. My father, he'll be furious that the marriage arrangement failed, and my reputation. She shrugged. Well, that's gone. Reputation's overrated, Ezra observed. Rather be alive with a bad name than dead with a good one. What will you do? Jonah asked quietly. Clara met his eyes. I don't know yet, but I know I can't go back to being who I was. That girl, the one who did what she was told, who never questioned, who thought safety came from following rules. She's gone, died somewhere up in those mountains. And who's left? Ezra asked gently. Clara smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. Someone stronger? Someone who knows that life's too short and precious to waste on other people's expectations. A commotion outside interrupted them. Shouts. Running feet. The marshal's voice raised in command. They rushed to the window to see Morrison and several deputies dragging a group of men toward the jail. Hayes was among them. Hands bound, face twisted with rage. He looked up, somehow sensing Clara at the window, and their eyes met. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. After a long moment, Hayes dropped his gaze first. It's over, Jonah said. This part is, Clara corrected. But something else is just beginning. She was right, Jonah realized. They'd survived the immediate danger. But larger questions remained. Where would she go? What would she do? And what about the connection growing between them? Forged in danger, but deeper than mere circumstance. Outside, snow began to fall again. Gentle this time. covering the mud and blood of their arrival. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, testimonies, decisions, farewells perhaps. But tonight, they were safe and warm and together. For now, that was enough. The courthouse in Bridgewater stood like a monument to civilization's reach into the wilderness, red brick and white columns, imposing despite its modest size. Clara stood before it in her borrowed dress, Jonah beside her, both waiting to testify at Hayes's trial. 3 weeks had passed since their arrival in town. 3 weeks of statements, depositions, and curious stares from townspeople who whispered behind their hands about the woman who'd survived capture by bandits. "Ready?" Jonah asked. Clara straightened her shoulders. As ready as one can be to face a room full of strangers judging your every word. Inside, the courtroom was packed. News of the trial had spread throughout the valley. A young bride kidnapped, a dramatic rescue, a chase through the mountains. It was the kind of story that drew crowds. Clara took the witness stand, acutely aware of every eye upon her. The prosecutor, a young man named David Fletcher, led her through her testimony with careful questions. She told it all: the attack on the wagon, Samuel's death, her captivity, Jonah's rescue. "And Mr. McCready had never met you before that night?" Fletcher asked. "Never. He risked his life for a stranger." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. In the defendant's box, Hayes glared at her with undisguised hatred. The defense attorney, brought in from Denver, tried to twist her words. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Bennett, that you spent several nights alone with Mr. McCready in his cabin? After he saved my life, yes." "And during that time, did any improprieties occur?" Clara's chin lifted. "Mr. McCready was a perfect gentleman, which is more than I can say for the men who murdered my husband and held me captive. But surely, a young woman alone with a man who's lived outside society for years—" "Objection!" Fletcher called out. "Relevance?" Sustained. The judge ruled. "Keep to the facts of the case, Counselor." But the damage was done. Clara could see it in the faces of some spectators, that mixture of pity and judgment she'd feared. In their minds, she was tainted now, regardless of the truth. Jonah testified next, his presence commanding despite his rough appearance. He'd trimmed his beard and hair for the trial, but still looked like what he was: a man more at home in the mountains than a courtroom. He told his part simply, without embellishment: the cries for help, finding Clara, the fight at the cabin. When asked why he'd intervened, his answer was equally simple: it was the right thing to do. Ezra's testimony proved crucial. As a war veteran and respected figure, his word carried weight. He described the attack on the ranger station in military detail, leaving no doubt about Hayes's guilt. The trial lasted 2 days. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, Clara felt no triumph, only exhaustion. Hayes would hang, his men would serve long sentences, but none of it would bring Samuel back or restore what she'd lost. Outside the courthouse, she found herself face to face with Thomas Bennett, Samuel's father. He was a stern man with iron-gray hair and eyes like his late son's. "Mrs. Bennett," he said stiffly. "Or do you prefer Morrison now?" "I hardly know anymore." Clara replied honestly, "I've come to settle Samuel's affairs. There's a small inheritance, not much, but legally yours as his widow." Clara hadn't expected this. Thank you." "Don't thank me." His voice was cold. "I'm doing what the law requires, nothing more. You were my son's wife for less than a day. That hardly makes you family." The words stung, but Clara understood. To him, she was a reminder of his son's death, nothing more. "I also came to tell you," Bennett continued, "that you're no longer welcome at our ranch or in our social circles. Whatever happened in those mountains, the scandal attached to your name is something we cannot accept." "I understand," Clara said quietly. Bennett turned to go, then paused. "That man, McCready, there are old charges against him in Silver Creek. Murder. You should know the kind of person you've allied yourself with." After he left, Clara stood in the street, feeling more alone than she had even in the bandits' camp. The town bustled around her, but she was apart from it, marked by her experiences. "Clara?" She turned to find Jonah approaching, Ezra beside him. They'd witnessed the exchange with Bennett. "Pleasant fellow," Ezra commented dryly. "He's grieving," Clara said, though the excuse sounded hollow even to her. "His grief doesn't give him the right to be cruel," Jonah said, anger simmering in his voice. They walked together down Main Street, an unlikely trio drawing stares and whispers. At the boarding house, Mrs. Winters met them with the news. "There's a letter for you, Mrs. Bennett, from Denver." Clara's hands trembled as she opened it. Her father's handwriting, sharp and precise as the man himself. "Clara, word has reached us of your circumstances. The shame you have brought upon this family is beyond measure. Not only did you fail in your duty to secure the Bennett alliance, but you have also created a scandal that will haunt us for years. You are no longer welcome in this house. Your belongings will be sent to wherever you choose to exile yourself. Do not attempt to return or contact us. Consider yourself divorced from this family as surely as if you had never been born to it." Harrison, Morris, and Clara read it twice, then folded it carefully. "Well, that's that, then." "Clara," Jonah began. "No," she forced a smile. "It's actually freeing, in a way. No more pretending I can go back to that life." That evening, they gathered in Mrs. Winters' parlor. The trial was over. Hayes would hang in 3 days, and decisions needed to be made. "I'm heading back to the mountains," Ezra announced. "Getting too old for town drama, but my offer stands. Either of you needs a place to stay. My door's open." "Thank you," Clara said warmly. "For everything." "What about you?" Ezra asked her. "What's next?" Clara had been thinking about little else. "I have some money, Samuel's inheritance. Small as it is, I could go east, start over where no one knows me. Or," she glanced at Jonah, "I could stay in the territory, find work, maybe build a different kind of life." Towns aren't always kind to women on their own, Jonah warned. "Especially women with histories." "Then perhaps I shouldn't stay in town," Clara said. The words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Jonah's cabin in the mountains, isolated and hard but honest. It was mad to even consider it. "Yet, you can't be serious," Jonah said, reading her thoughts. "Why not? I've already lost everything society values, family, reputation, the protection of a good name. What else is there to lose? It's no life for a woman. The cold, the isolation. I survived it before. For a few days, not months, years. Then teach me." Clara leaned forward, intensity in every line of her body. "You taught me to shoot, to read sign, to build fires. Teach me the rest." "People would talk," Jonah said weakly. Clara laughed. Actually laughed. "They're already talking, at least in the mountains. I wouldn't have to hear them." Ezra watched this exchange with interest. "You know," he said slowly, "there's an old trapper's cabin about 2 miles from Jonah's place. Belonged to French Pete before he died last winter. Solid building. Good water nearby. A determined woman could make something of it." Clara's eyes lit up. "Really? Would need work, roof repair, new chinking, but the bones are good. I have money for supplies, and I'm not afraid of hard work." "This is madness," Jonah protested. "Is it?" Clara challenged. "More mad than living by society's rules? More mad than marrying strangers for money? More mad than letting others decide your worth based on gossip and circumstances beyond your control?" She stood, pacing to the window. Outside, Bridgewater went about its evening routines. Respectable people living respectable lives, never questioning the chains they'd forged for themselves. "In the mountains," she said softly, "I felt alive for the first time. Not the proper daughter, not the dutiful wife, not the ruined woman, just myself." "Is it so mad to want that feeling back?" Jonah was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "The old charges Bennett mentioned. In Silver Creek. They're true. I am wanted for murder. Even though I didn't do it, If you're associated with me, then I'll be associated with a man who saved my life." Clara finished. "A man who showed more honor and kindness than any of the respectable people who've turned their backs on me. It would be proper," Ezra interjected thoughtfully. "If she had her own place, no one could say anything if she's living independent-like. And if neighbors help each other out sometimes, well, that's just mountain custom." Hope bloomed in Clara's chest. A cabin of her own. Honest work. Freedom from society's suffocating expectations. And Jonah nearby. That thought warmed her more than she cared to examine. "Would you?" she asked Jonah directly. "Help me. I mean, show me how to survive up there on my own terms." He met her eyes, and she saw his resistance crumbling. "You're determined to do this." "I am. Even knowing how hard it'll be? The loneliness? The danger?" "I've been lonely in crowded rooms," Clara said. "As for danger, I'd rather face wolves and weather than the kind of cruelty dressed up in silk and good manners." Jonah sighed, but she caught the hint of a smile. "Then God help me. Yes, I'll help you." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Relief, joy, fear all mingled together. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet," Jonah warned. "Winter's coming, and mountain winters don't forgive mistakes. Then I'd better learn fast," Clara said, and her smile was fierce with determination. Ezra raised his coffee cup. "To new beginnings, then, and to folks brave enough to forge their own paths." They drank to that. 3 outcasts in a boarding house parlor, planning a future that defied every convention. Outside, snow began to fall, but inside was warmth and possibility, and the radical notion that a person could choose their own destiny. The respectable citizens of Bridgewater would be scandalized. Clara knew. A young widow choosing isolation over propriety, rough living over comfort. They'd whisper about her for years. Let them whisper. She had mountains to climb. Dawn broke glorious and golden over the mountains, painting the peaks in shades of rose and amber. Clara stood outside her cabin, truly hers now after a winter of hard work, and breathed in the crisp spring air. 6 months had passed since she'd made her choice, and not once had she regretted it. The cabin that had been French Pete's was transformed. New chinking sealed the gaps between logs. A sturdy roof kept out rain and snow, and glass windows, a luxury Jonah had helped her install, let in the morning light. Inside, herbs hung drying from the rafters. Preserves lined handmade shelves, and a bearskin rug covered the floor before the stone fireplace. "Morning!" She turned to see Jonah approaching through the meadow that separated their homes. He carried fresh venison, his successful dawn hunt evident in his satisfied expression. "Morning yourself," she called back, unable to suppress her smile. These daily visits had become routine, checking on each other, sharing meals, working together on projects too big for one person alone. "Thought you might like some fresh meat," he said, holding up the venison. "That dough I've been tracking finally made a mistake." "Perfect timing. I just finished baking bread." They prepared breakfast together, moving around each other with practiced ease. 6 months of shared meals had created a comfortable rhythm between them. Clara seasoned the meat while Jonah tended the fire, neither needing to speak to coordinate their efforts. "Ezra's coming up tomorrow," Jonah mentioned as they ate. "Says he has news from town. Good news or bad? Knowing Ezra, probably both." Clara laughed. The old man had become a regular visitor, splitting his time between his ranger station and checking on what he called his mountain family. After breakfast, they walked down to the stream where Clara had been working on a vegetable garden. The plot was ambitious, perhaps too ambitious. Jonah had warned, but Clara was determined. Self-sufficiency meant growing food, not just hunting it. "Potatoes are coming in well," she observed, kneeling to examine the shoots breaking through the soil. "You've got a talent for it," Jonah said, and she heard pride in his voice. "Never thought I'd see anyone make anything grow up here besides pine trees." "My grandmother again," Clara said. She kept a garden even on the trail west, said it was hope made manifest, planting for a future you believed in. She stood, brushing dirt from her hands, and found Jonah watching her with an expression she'd been seeing more often lately. Something warm and wondering, quickly hidden when she met his eyes. "What?" she asked softly. "Nothing, just—" He cleared his throat. "You're different than when you first came here. Stronger." "I was always strong," Clara corrected. "I just didn't know it." They stood there in the morning sun, the stream chattering beside them, mountains rising all around, the moment stretched, full of unspoken possibilities. "Clara," Jonah began, then stopped. "I need to tell you something." Her heart quickened. "Yes? I went to Silver Creek last week." Whatever she'd expected. It wasn't that. "Jonah, that's dangerous." "I know, but I needed to see. 5 years is a long time. Things change." He took a breath. "Garrett Marsh is dead. Died last winter. His son took over his holdings, and from what I heard, he's nothing like his father." Clara waited, sensing more. "I spoke to the marshal, new man. Wasn't there when I was accused. He looked at the old files. Said the case against me was thin as paper, without Marsh pushing it, and with those paid witnesses long gone." Jonah met her eyes. "He's not pursuing it. I'm not a wanted man anymore." "Oh, Jonah." Clara felt tears threaten. "That's wonderful. You can go anywhere now. Do anything." "I don't want to go anywhere," he said quickly. "This is my home, these mountains, this life." He paused. "You." The word hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. "Me?" Clara whispered. "You have to know how I feel," Jonah said, voice rough. "These months, watching you build this life, seeing your courage every day. Clara, She stepped forward and kissed him, cutting off whatever careful words he'd planned. For a moment, he froze. Then his arms came around her, pulling her close. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "I love you too," Clara said simply, in case that wasn't clear. Jonah's laugh was shaky. "Clear enough." "But," Clara continued, stepping back slightly, "I need you to understand something. This life I've built, it's mine. I won't give up my independence, not even for love. I've been someone's daughter, someone's wife. Now I'm just Clara, and I won't lose that." "I wouldn't want you to," Jonah said immediately. "I fell in love with a woman who chose the mountains over comfort, who faced down bandits and built her own home. Why would I want to change that?" "Then what are you proposing?" "Not proposing," Jonah smiled. "Not yet, just stating intentions. That I love you. That I want to court you proper, even if proper up here means bringing you fresh meat and helping with your roof." "And if the courting goes well?" Clara asked, heart singing. "Then maybe we talk about adding a room to one of these cabins, or building something new halfway between. But you'll always have your own space, your own life, partners, not what you had before." Clara felt the last of her walls crumble. This man understood her in ways no one else ever had. "Partners," she agreed. "I like that." The next day, Ezra arrived as promised, full of news. "Town's still gossiping about you two," he reported cheerfully. "The widow who chose the wilderness. Some say you're mad. Some say you're magnificent." "And what do you say?" Clara asked, serving him coffee and fresh cornbread. "I say you're the smartest woman I've met. Look at this place." He gestured around the cozy cabin. "You've made a real home here, and from the way Jonah can't stop staring at you, I'd say you've made more than that." Clara blushed while Jonah glowered at his old friend. "About time, too," Ezra continued, unperturbed. "Man needs more than mountains for company. And speaking of company," his expression grew serious, "there's something else. A family came through town last week, heading west. Their daughter, girl about 16. She's in trouble, same kind you were in, if you take my meaning. Forced marriage to settle debts." Clara's hand stilled on her cup. "What happened?" "She ran, made it to town, but her family's after her. The marshal can't interfere, legally. She belongs to her father until she's married. But I thought—" He looked between them. These mountains have been good at hiding folks who need it. You want us to take her in? Jonah asked. Just until she figures out what's next. Girl's got spine. Reminded me of someone else I know. He winked at Clara. Clara and Jonah exchanged glances. Bring her, Clara said decisively. There's room in my cabin, and God knows I understand what she's facing. Knew you'd say that. Ezra smiled. I'll fetch her next week. After Ezra left, Clara and Jonah sat on her porch, watching the sun set behind the peaks. The same mountains that had once seemed like prison walls now felt like protective arms. No regrets? Jonah asked quietly. None, Clara said firmly. Oh, there are things I miss sometimes. Hot baths whenever I want them, fresh fruit in winter. But those are just comforts. This, she gestured at their wild, beautiful world. This is life, real life. And now we're taking in strays, Jonah noted with amusement. Why not? These mountains saved me. Maybe they can save others too. She leaned against his shoulder. Besides, won't it be nice to have another woman around? Someone to help with the garden, share the work, share the gossip, more like. Jonah teased. That too. They sat in comfortable silence as stars began to appear. Somewhere in the forest, an owl called. The stream sang its endless song. Peace settled over them like a blessing. I have something for you, Jonah said suddenly, pulling a small wrapped package from his coat. Clara unwrapped it carefully, gasping at what she found. A ring, not fancy, but beautifully crafted from silver and turquoise. I made it, Jonah said shyly. Been working on it all winter. It's not a proposal, not yet. Call it a promise that I'll be here, that we'll build something together. When you're ready. Clara slipped it onto her right hand, tears blurring her vision. It's perfect. Like you, he said softly, then seemed embarrassed by his own words. Hardly perfect, Clara laughed, wiping her eyes. But getting better every day. As night deepened around them, Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here, a naive girl in a wedding dress, terrified and helpless. Now, a woman who could survive blizzards, grow her own food, shoot a rifle, and choose her own path. The old Clara would have been horrified at her calloused hands, her simple clothes, her unladylike skills. But the old Clara had been sleepwalking through life, following a script written by others. What are you thinking? Jonah asked. About transformation. Clara said, how sometimes we have to lose everything to find out who we really are. And who are you? Clara smiled, fierce and free. I'm Clara Morrison, mountain woman, survivor, and someday, when I'm ready, partner to the best man I know. Someday soon, I hope, Jonah said. Maybe, Clara allowed, but not tonight. Tonight, I'm just grateful. For these mountains, for this life, for you. They stood together, hands linked, looking out at their domain. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, helping a runaway girl, expanding the garden, preparing for another winter. But tonight was perfect in its simplicity. Two souls who'd been branded by society's judgments had found each other in the wilderness. They'd discovered that, sometimes, the only way to truly live was to walk away from everything you were supposed to be and become who you were meant to be. The mountains had tested them, scarred them, and ultimately saved them. Now they stood together, ready to face whatever came next, bound not by law or convention, but by choice and love and the hard-won freedom to write their own story. In the distance, wolves howled. Not a threat now, but a reminder. The wild called to the wild, and Clara and Jonah answered with their whole hearts, building a life that was harsh and beautiful and entirely their own. Thank you all for listening to this tale of love and survival in the Old West. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this story from, whether you're by a cozy fire, on your daily commute, or perhaps even out in the mountains yourself. Please subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more authentic frontier stories, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, partners.